Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is part of City Talk's series of conversations on the central issues of the 2008 campaign. A new world order? A post-America world? Hot wars, cold wars, Georgia on our minds. So is Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and China. To guide us through this geopolitical world and to assess America's role in it is Dr. Lawrence Korb, who's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a senior advisor to the Center for Defense Information. Previously, he directed national security studies on the Council on Foreign Relations. And before that, as a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, he had led the Center for Public Policy Education, and before that was Dean of the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Korb has served as Assistant Secretary of Defense during the Reagan administration, where he administered about 70% of the Defense Department budget. He has been widely credited for turning a hollow, broken military into a modern, effective force that it was in the first Gulf War. Dr. Korb has written 20 books and more than 100 articles on national security issues. He's made over 1,000 appearances on such shows as The Today Show, Face the Nation, This Week with David Brinkley, The News Hour, Nightline, 60 Minutes, The O'Reilly Factor, and Crossfire. He has written more than 100 op-ed pieces, which have appeared in major newspapers throughout the country. Welcome.
Nice to be with you, Doug.
Nice resume for a guy from Woodhaven, Queens, and St. Thomas the Apostle.
You've done pretty well yourself, so.
Okay, now what I didn't say in the intro is that you were also my grammar school baseball coach, my best friend's brother, and my mother-in-law's paperboy. So, welcome. Georgia on our mind. What's going on? What are we seeing here? What are the strategic implications? What is Russia doing? What are we doing? What should we be doing?
Well, what you're seeing is a readjustment to the breakup of the Soviet Union and the diminishment of Russian power. The Russians have come through the terrible time in the 90s, and given the high price of oil, they've been able to get themselves back to where they feel they should be.
And Putin has run a tight ship, and there's a feeling of movement. Is the bear back?
Well, I mean, the bear, I would say the cub is back. It's not a bear. I mean, they're not going to be like they were during the Cold War, but they're not going to be a bit player. I mean, they were really just pushed aside during the 90s. The first President Bush and Secretary Baker had promised the Russians, that if they gave up the Warsaw Pact, that we would not expand NATO into their areas. We expanded to all the Warsaw Pact countries. We did it to the Baltics, and they were talking about doing it to Georgia and Ukraine, and the Russians basically said, that's enough. And they were looking for an excuse to put Georgia in its place. And the president of Georgia, thinking because he had put troops into Iraq that, we would bail him out, decided to, take control of one of the semi-autonomous areas in Georgia. And, of course, that gave the Russians the excuse that they were looking for to come in and reassert their authority and their role in the world. And
as of now, it appears as if the Russians have stopped moving into Georgia proper, but events are moving so fast, the situation is likely to change before airtime. What are the likely events moving forward? What should the United States be doing? And let's talk about the candidates.
Well, I think what will happen is these semi-autonomous regions, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, where the it's theoretically part of Georgia, but the people want to be part of Russia. And basically, I think
and they've been essentially autonomous since the early 90s.
That's correct. And so basically what will happen is those areas are going to get back pretty much their autonomy. Best case, we can put an international peacekeeping force in there rather than just Russian.
Likelihood?
Well, I think there is. If the Russians feel that they've basically got the message across to the Georgians, you know, this far and no farther.
Okay, I mean, that's one audience, the Georgians, and they're right there. What are the other audiences and what are the messages that they presumably are sending?
Well, I think the other message that they're sending is to the United States and our European allies, look, don't put these people into NATO, particularly Georgia and Ukraine. It's one thing for the Czech Republic or Poland, but, you know, these, you know, remember, Georgia's where Stalin comes from.
Right.
So
this was part of the Soviet Union.
Right, and it was also part of Russia for over 100
Right.
years. So, I mean, they're basically saying, you know, enough is enough.
This is vital interest to them?
Oh, it's very vital interest to them, and it's not the only strategic interest we have there is the oil. That's our strategic interest. But I think what's happening here, the end of American hegemony, you know, that the unipolar moment that occurred at the end of the Cold War, that's over, and basically we're going to go back to sort of a more normal international politics.
Talk about this more normal. I mean, it's not going to be bipolar, but it's going to be multipolar with us, the largest of the poles.
Yeah, well, we'll still be the most significant power, but we will not be able to dominate the way we used to. China, as we see from the Olympics, is going to be a big factor. India, Brazil, a unified Europe, and I think Russia probably, but again, don't forget, Russia's got some long-term problems. They've got some health problems. Their population is declining, so they're not going to be as significant as they were in the Cold War, nor as significant as China or India.
But this is a multipolar world.
Well, I think you're going back to the more normal. The world, it's very unusual that you have one dominant power for a long period of time.
And in a sense, the dominant power was the agent of its own diminution?
Well, I think we got carried away with our power, and we thought that our military power was unequaled, and we could go into countries like Iraq and just, you know, be greeted as liberators and transform the whole Middle East. And I think we've seen there are limits to American power. And also the problem you have is whether you agree or not with the wars in Iraq, and I think most people support Afghanistan because that's where the attacks of September 11th came from. The fact of the matter is that the Bush administration's tried to do it on the cheap. They've called for no sacrifices on the American people. This is the first extended ground war we've ever fought where we have not raised taxes or have conscription.
Okay. Well, I want to get back to Iraq, but I want to stick with Georgia for a moment. What happens next? What ought to happen next from the American point of view?
Well, I think what we would like is to have a ceasefire, and if what the Russians said today holds, that will be good. And then basically you will come up with some sort of arrangement that allows both sides to save face. In other words, South Ossetia can still be nominally part of Georgia, but they'll be able to control their own destiny.
They don't want the president out?
Well, they would like the president out, but I don't think they're going to be able to force the president out. I think because he's pretty popular there, and that would be for them really a bridge too far to force him out against the wishes. The majority of the Georgian people like him. It's just the autonomous regions don't.
Okay. The United States response. What has been and what ought to be the response?
Well, I think
let's look at the candidates.
Well, I think the United States response basically should have been the Russians, that even though you were provoked, as I think President Bush said, it was a disproportionate response. And then the United States' real response has got to be to work with the Europeans particularly to come up with some sort of international or European-led peacekeeping force. I don't think the Russians are going to want Americans in those areas, but I mean a European peace force that will keep the situation under control.
Through the public statements, at least the ones that I've read by Bush and Cheney, they don't seem to recognize that the Russians had, in a sense, quote unquote, a legitimate strategic grievance here.
Well, I think the other thing is they don't recognize, particularly the statements by Cheney and McCain, is when you say, well, this will not stand. Well, what are you going to do about it?
Right. Well, that was. Is this simply more bold talk?
Well,
and it's
sure.
Hungary or Czechoslovakia. You can't do anything.
Well, it's also very similar to North Korea. The president said, we will not allow North Korea to get nuclear weapons. Well, they got them.
Right.
Now you have to make the best of that arrangement. And so I think you have to be very careful in international politics, particularly as a great power. Do not make statements that you can't back up, because then your credibility goes.
Excuse me,
right.
like bring it on?
Well, yeah, I think, or mission accomplished, or things like that. But I mean, really, I thought President Bush was, he did not go too far, but I think Cheney did. And I think somehow or another, the president led the president of Georgia, Saakashvili, to think we would bail him out because he had helped us in Iraq. And I think he got carried away. We, the United States, have been training his troops.
Right. Well, they're the third largest contingent in Iraq.
Right. And we've also been training his troops
Sure.
at home that, in fact, that he would be able to deal with Russia, or that we would bail him out. And I think...
Was there any intent for us to bail him out? And did we have the ability?
There shouldn't have been, in fact.
And in fact, would we do this? Do we really have an ability to bail him out?
We don't. And I think that message should have been conveyed. But remember, Bush went there in 2005
Right.
and was greeted and,
Right.
Talked about freedom on the march and all of those
So in
things.
a sense, it gave them the at least the illusion that they could act against these separatist provinces without Russian retaliation because of the implicit backing of the United States.
That's correct. That's what they thought. I think when the history of this is written, you'll find out that that's exactly what they thought.
Okay. New Cold War?
No, not a new Cold War.
This is just this multipolar post-America world.
Well, basically, it's a return to more normal international relations.
Okay. Talk about the candidates in their response. McCain, quick to unequivocally blame and, in a sense, make demands that he can't deliver. I mean,
Yeah.
you just alluded to that. And Obama, more nuanced, challenged it. Different messages here. I mean, politically, McCain, tough guy, aggressive. I'm not going to take any of this stuff, sort of, back off. And Obama, what is his message? More nuanced, more thoughtful?
Well, I think it's more nuanced.
And does it work?
Well, I think basically he said, this is wrong. It should be condemned, but we've got to work with the international community. This is Obama to deal with it. See, one of the problems of the Bush administration has been the normal traditional American approach to the world is always multilateral if we can, unilateral if we must.
Right.
This administration is unilateral if we can, multilateral only if we must. And McCain was going back into that, thing where he sort of said, all right, he has a relationship with Saakashvili and, try to convey it. Hey, I think he thought if he got tough that this would convey to the Russians that you better be careful. But in fact, the Russians know, we're so bogged down in Iraq and Afghanistan, we don't have anything to do, and they also know the limitations of the logistics of the area. I mean, they would have all of the advantages there.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move from Georgia to Iraq, and let me just quote you. The Bush administration fixed the intelligence to support the invasion and did no realistic planning for the post-major conflict phase of the war. You've opposed the war, you called for broader multinational coalition, intensified weapons inspection, and expanded diplomacy. But Bush didn't listen to you, nor did he listen to his generals. Where are we right now in Iraq, both in terms of where we are in the ground, where we are strategically and tactically?
Well, in Iraq, you have another moment to basically help the United States improve its overall security, because the Iraqi government has basically said, we want you to set a timeline to get out.
Yeah, contrary to both what Bush wanted and certainly what McCain wanted. In a sense, announcing it when Obama was there was almost like an endorsement of his approach.
Right. In fact, Charles Krauthammer, the conservative columnist in the Washington Post, basically said, you know, Maliki voted for Obama, you know, and gave him his first vote. But I think you have a unique moment here that you ought to capitalize on, because the violence is down, because we basically have this deal with the Sunni insurgents where we're paying them to help us fight al-Qaeda.
We're buying them off temporarily.
Right.
What happens after al-Qaeda, in a sense, is defeated? What happens to these
folks? The problem
is
that these people have to be incorporated into the Iraqi security forces, and Maliki doesn't want to do that. So
because
there's a point,
he's a Shia.
That's right, and he doesn't trust them. He opposed the deal. We did it. Actually, we could have had it in 2004 and 5. We did it in 2006 because things got so bad. And so that you have that temporary lull. If the Sunni insurgents get the impression we're not leaving, that's going to change their attitude because they don't like foreigners.
Okay.
And so I think you have this moment. Muqtada al-Sadr has basically said, as long as there's a withdrawal date, I'm going to lay low.
And in part, the decline in violence was the Sadr ceasefire. In addition to, quote-unquote, the surge and buying off the Sunnis, that was another element for the decline in violence.
Well, it was. And you also changed your tactics. And you put the 30,000 more troops in, and you went to a counterinsurgency model.
A little late in the game, no?
Well, they did. I mean, and again, that's where I talked about they didn't plan for what would happen after the fall of Saddam Hussein.
Assess the surge. You did a piece that talks about the long-term strategic consequences versus the tactical gains.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, I mean, any military operation should be done for a political or strategic purpose. That's why you use force. The idea was that if you put more troops in and got the violence down, then the Iraqis would make the political compromises necessary to create a unified state in which all of the various...
So the decrease in violence wasn't an end in itself, but rather simply a means to larger ends.
Right. It was supposed to give the Iraqis a breathing space. Now, what has happened is the Iraqis will pass some laws to keep us off their back, but they don't implement them. I mean, you got this thing with the provincial election law that was supposed to take place in October. But, you know, and what had happened, it was passed by the parliament, then vetoed by the presidential council, and then the parliament adjourned for a month. So, I mean, there's no way that they can have it. So what basically, and my feeling is, you know, that as long as the Iraqis think that we'll be there to bail them out, the government, they're not going to make the hard political choices. And so that's why I think setting a withdrawal date will focus their minds on what they need to do.
So Dr. Johnson's prospect up a hanging, focusing the mind wonderfully.
That's right, yes. I mean, I think that's real. And I've been arguing that for a long, long time. I mean, basically that's what you've got to get them to do. Because at some point you got to leave, you know.
Well, let's talk about withdrawal. You've argued you could get out reasonably and safely and preserve your security options in 10 to 12 months.
Actually,
explain this. Also, before you do that, look at the argument that if we leave precipitously, it will create mayhem, slaughter, genocide, etc.
Okay. Well, the two things. One, a lot of people who, when you say, gee, we ought to leave, will say, well, yeah, but it would take us 4 years to get out. And so what I did is study, and actually it was 170,000 troops when I did it, and said you could get out in 10 to 12 months. I've just reissued it this week. In fact, it came out yesterday and showed with 140,000 you could get out in 8 to 10 months.
Right.
And what that basically what that means is you can get all your troops out and you can get your vital equipment. I mean, you don't have to take every porta-john out, for example, that you have there.
Right.
And the U.S. military is great in logistics, and it would basically be an invasion in reverse. And a lot of people will say, well, you know, you're going to be limited by the seaports in Kuwait. Well, once you're in Kuwait, you're out. And that's the main thing. Then you can wait to go. So you can do that in 8 to 10 months. Now the question then becomes, should you?
Right.
And I think you really should, because until you do, the Iraqis won't do what they need to do. And the other is the regional powers, particularly Iran, will not work with you to make sure Iraq doesn't become a failed state, because they simply don't trust us, particularly Iran.
And they have no interest in Iraq being a failed state.
No, because if not, I mean, you know, they talk about these scenarios that would happen if you leave. Well, let's assume it becomes a haven for Al-Qaeda. Well, the Al-Qaeda is a Sunni group. The Iranians are Persian Shias. They don't want that, which is why they helped us in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So then you would have the chance. Now, given why you went in and how you went in, there are no guarantees, what would happen. But would you have, if you make the political compromises, then you're not going to have this, violence in there. And the idea that somehow, I mean, a lot of people who went in think that Iraq is going to be contain Iran. No, Maliki and those people, they spent a lot of time in Iran.
Sure, and they're Shias.
And it's interesting. Ahmadinejad, the head of Iran, comes to visit Iraq. He announces 2 weeks ahead of time he's coming, drives in from the airport, and lives out in the city. Our people, president, vice president, secretary of state, they have to sneak in the dead of night.
And they're in the green zone, and they're in this bunker.
That's right.
It says something.
Yes, and so they're going to have a relationship, and I think we need to recognize that.
I mean, but you've got all kinds, and then unfortunately we don't have the time to talk about the regional implications vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, Turkey, as well as Iran, etc. Okay. The question that was asked of General Petraeus, and that is, does the war in Iraq make America safer? And the answer is?
No, it has not, because what has happened is it's rejuvenated Al-Qaeda, because it's got them to get a lot more recruits. Number two, it's distracted us from dealing with Afghanistan, which is really the central front. I mean, that's where the attacks of September 11th came. That's where Al-Qaeda is reconstituting itself. It has undermined our ability to project our hard, like in Georgia, and soft power around the world. I mean, America is just not. Aaron David Miller has a new book out that he says we're in the
titled.
Basically, it talks about America's role in the Middle East, and he says we're not feared. We're not liked. We're not respected.
Machiavelli would be very upset.
And
we hate it.
Yeah, in many ways we are.
Then we failed the Machiavelli's
That's
test.
right. And so, I mean, and his last thing is we're not feared, you see. And so we really, it has, undermined us. And so I think it has diminished our security and undermined our ability to win what the president calls, I don't like the term, but he uses a global war on terror.
Okay, let's talk about that global war on terror. And the other sort of piece of it is Afghanistan. And the Bush administration, as you suggest, conceptualizes this one war on terror. You've said this is a faulty premise.
That's right. I mean, you
and
can't
it leads to faulty policies.
Can't conflate Afghanistan and Iraq because Afghanistan is a place that harbored Al-Qaeda, which attacked New York City and Washington on September 11th. Completely different. The other thing is, we didn't occupy Afghanistan. We didn't have this coalition provision authority. We set up a government there right away. Right. And the Afghanistan people wanted us there. Now they're beginning not to because we've done such a terrible job in doing it.
The incompetence is incredible, let alone the strategic errors. The operational incompetence is just astounding.
Well, I mean, there's no one in charge. Secretary Gates is finally going to have one military command there. I mean, how long did it take you to figure that out?
Excuse me. Excuse me. We'll talk on a subsequent show about the personalities that led to this situation. What should we do in Afghanistan? If you're advising the president and you've spoken to Senator Obama, what might you tell
Well, I think
them?
the first thing you have to do is what Senator Obama has been saying for 2 years. You got to send more troops. Now, that's not the only answer, but you don't have enough troops. You have to.
And in a sense, you never did. You always had this huge misproportion between Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, what happened is we thought we had won in Afghanistan in 2000 and late 2001, shifted all of our attention and took special forces out, actually, to go to Iraq. You also have to have a much more unified effort. Right now, for giving an example, one of the problems you have in Afghanistan is the poppies, the opium.
Right.
Well, we have one policy. Our State Department has one policy, which is use aerial spraying. Our military doesn't like that. Our NATO allies, remember the 37 countries, They don't like that. The Afghanistan don't like it. So, I mean, you've got two policies, you know, to deal with one.
What explains this?
Well, basically, lack of attention on the part of the administration. I mean, you don't have someone who gets up every day and works directly for the president who worries about Afghanistan. You have a national security advisor supposed to do that, but Steve Hadley is really not up to the Kissinger or Brzezinski type that could, or Scowcroft that could do that.
We'll talk about them. We'll talk about the national security advisors and how they stack up as well. You've said that history doesn't repeat itself, but often rhymes. What are the lessons that should be learned out of Iraq and Afghanistan? And what are the lessons that we might learn that we shouldn't be learning?
Well, I think the first thing you have to learn is when you go in, start a military operation, you need to obviously hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Okay,
that didn't happen.
No, I mean, particularly in Iraq, we planned for the, planned for the best. Don Rumsfeld cut down the number of troops. They didn't listen to General Shinseki, the Army chief.
And the Powell doctrine of boots on the ground.
Which is the second thing that you need to have an exit strategy or an end game. What is your goal, and when will you know that you've achieved it?
And the goals have constantly shifted, or at least
so
the
is the
stated
enemy.
goals.
I mean, we went in to get rid of Saddam Hussein, never planned for an insurgency. Then we fought a Sunni insurgency. Then we fought a Shia Muqtada al-Sadr's militia. Then it shifted to Iran. I mean, we keep changing the.
So what's the lesson that we should have learned?
Well, the lesson is that, it's much easier to start a war than to stop it, and make sure before you start it that you know what your goals are. The model actually is the first President Bush, the first Persian Gulf War. You got the international community. We got over 200,000 troops from other nations. And we got all the money to fight it from everybody, so that's the way to do it.
And it was a lesson not learned by the son.
And basically, President Bush stopped when he achieved his objective. He got him out of Kuwait, and everybody said, well, you ought to go to Baghdad. And he wrote in his book, what will I do if I get there? Well, this is what
happened. What's the lesson that shouldn't be learned? I mean, we learned a lot of false lessons in Vietnam, for example. What's the dangerous lesson that we might learn?
Well,
here?
I think the dangerous lesson would be that you just structure your military completely for counterinsurgency. But as we've seen with the Russians in Georgia, the great powers have not gone away. So I think you need to have a balanced force. I mean, people are so carried away with the quote-unquote global war on terror that you'll just structure your forces for counterinsurgency and not anticipate, the use of force in a conventional sense.
Okay, that's the first of a two-part conversation with you, Larry Korb. And we'll talk in the second show, which is going to be airing the week beginning August 22nd, on the military, the defense budget, procurement, operations, all that good stuff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.